I am Allison Laffer-Lita. Welcome, everybody. I'm the Executive Director for the Nonprofit Resource Hub. For those of you that are new with us and are not nonprofit partners, we are an organization that provides amazing resources and services and events just like this one today, where we are here to support our nonprofit sector and those in it. We are very lucky to have amazing associate members like Yvonne and Stephen, who are here to share their wisdom, their knowledge with you. You are always welcome to connect with them after today's webinar if you would like to book some time with them. You are also welcome to put your questions in the chat and they will be fielding them as we go. Today's webinar is Right-Sizing Your Nonprofit, Strategic Approaches to Optimizing Your Space. This will be presented by Yvonne Pho and Stephen Powers. I would like to give you both a moment to introduce yourselves. Yvonne?
So hi, I'm Yvonne. I'm a capital project manager, really what's known as a tenant rep or an owner's rep. My sole purpose really is to help individuals such as yourselves build and design and construct your office space and bring you through from the beginning through occupancy. I have a company called YPI. We've been doing this for a very long time, and we work with Stephen quite a bit. So I'll turn it over to Stephen for his introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Allison, for having us. Really appreciate it. I'm Stephen Powers. I'm the co-founder of Open Impact Real Estate, and we specialize in helping nonprofits think through how their real estate can align with their mission and their organizational goals. And we do this as a consultant in the planning stage and then as a broker to help implement these strategies. And we work with a really wide range of organizations from smaller foundations and cultural organizations to larger social service agencies, universities, and museums. Looking forward to jumping in.
Thank you. Welcome to both of you. Once again, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat for Yvonne and Stephen. And I'm personally excited to hear what is going on and how you can help our nonprofits maximize their space. So I am going to sign off the screen. I'm here if you need me, but I am going to give you both the floor. Welcome.
So just to set the stage a little bit, we wanted to share some information about the current environment in New York City. New York is not necessarily reflective of everything that's happening nationally. New York is its own economy in many ways. People in New York, for example, are coming in the office on average more than 3 days a week. And this is up from last year substantially. You might have seen some articles in places like the Wall Street Journal where New York is on fire. What I'll tell you is it's a tale of two cities. The finance sector and the folks that like to move into the Class A and trophy buildings are really back in the office in full. It's a the vast majority are in at least 4 days a week, and the areas that they occupy space like Grand Central have almost no vacancy. Bryant Park has effectively negative vacancy right now. If you've been to Bryant Park recently, you'll see it is bursting with activity. But then there is still a substantial amount of vacancy in some of the types of buildings that nonprofits occupy, a lot of those B buildings, but that's coming down. So the last area where there's sort of crazy good deals available is the Garment District and in downtown Brooklyn, where there is a major office core, as well as Jamaica. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But everywhere else, we're seeing a big tightening up. And in Lower Manhattan, there's a very large amount of conversion from office to residential. So the supply in Lower Manhattan is for those types of buildings that were under occupied are now converting to residential. This may be surprising to you, but maybe not, considering all the young people that like to work at nonprofits. There's 11% of the 2024 college grads moved to New York City, and that's up. That's like the 2025. That's up 38% from last year in terms of the amount that's moving over. So it was still 10% or around 10% before, but it's a really substantial amount now. And then overall vacancy in the city is down to its lowest it's been in 5 years. Unemployment is down by almost a full point, and leasing volume is substantially up. So whenever I tell people that I work in nonprofit real estate, they look at me like that's an oxymoron. But for those of you who work in nonprofit space and have real estate, you know how critical it is to delivering on mission and how it's a part of how you operate as an organization. And so there's things, if you don't know about them as a nonprofit, that you miss out on. So things like maximizing the value of your tax exempt status. As a nonprofit, you don't have to pay real estate taxes in New York City if you own or if you lease with a structure that is simulates ownership. You also can, and that's about a 25% of your occupancy expense is real estate taxes, and it's built into your rent. If you might not even realize that you're paying that much of it. You have things like tax exempt bond financing, new market tax credits, public sector money from the city and state, capital grants that you can use to offset your real estate costs and be able to do things that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Right now, we're working with El Puente in Brooklyn, and they received nearly $10 million in capital grants towards their upcoming $15 million project. We also structured deals in a way to align with the risk profile of the organization. So most nonprofits are not in the business of taking on real estate risk, but real estate developers and landlords are in that business. And so we always try to structure the deal so that it's a landlord turnkey, so that the cost of the build goes up during construction. That risk is borne by the landlord. And Yvonne, I know that you've dealt with many projects in construction. You've seen probably projects that priced in one way and they came in much higher. How much of a real risk is this?
I think a lot of the risk is actually when people engage in turnkeys, they usually think that there's nothing else to do or to coordinate, and that's something we'll talk about later on in the slide deck. But there's still a lot for you as tenants to coordinate, even though the landlord takes on that turnkey risk. There's been an uptick in construction pricing for sure. Sometimes it's driven by change orders because of the work that we, potentially have not done in sequence of the landlord, but it's definitely gone up.
Yeah. So when you structure it as a turnkey, you have a scope of work document that's attached to the lease, and that anything within that scope of work is the responsibility of the landlord. So if the cost of steel goes up, like it did when we were doing Children's AIDS headquarters during the pandemic, and the price nearly doubled, our purchase price was a fixed purchase price of a to-be-built building. So we didn't pay for any of the increases in the cost of building their new headquarter building. Space needs, you need professional, affordable space that's also sensitive to security needs for the people that you serve. Board consensus is critical in these projects. Oftentimes you need to bring the board along the way throughout the process. So you want to get their buy-in during the early strategy phase before you go ahead and start implementing, and then get their buy-in once you have down to your top three and are recommending one to move forward with. And then finally, get their buy-in when you're about to spend money on executing a lease or purchase and sale agreement. And, it's important to speak board. And my partner, Lindsay, I always say speaks board better than anyone, but you want to have an advocate on your side who understands this process and the role that a nonprofit board plays. And then finally, fundraising and financials. These projects oftentimes can be the basis of a capital campaign, but also a lot of times landlords don't understand nonprofits' financials and don't understand why you're spending all of the money you receive every year and have very little income on it as opposed to a for-profit counterpart. We explain that that's intentional and that you actually are much more stable, and that there's no a single purpose entity that's on a lease. The nonprofit actually is generally the entire entity that's on the lease, and so it's better credit than some of your similarly sized for-profit counterparts. So we track the nonprofit buildings in New York City. So good thing about data is that every nonprofit over $100,000 a year has to file a 990. And so we look at every building that has more than 3 nonprofits in it and track those buildings. And then we focus on the ones that have the right types of landlords that care about having strong nonprofit tenants. These buildings are professional, affordable, program and high traffic friendly, accessible to public transportation, accommodating to your branding needs. You don't want something that's ostentatious, even if it's cheap, and then sensitive to security needs. So one of our clients works with folks that are formerly incarcerated, and it's important to have a building where they feel welcome when they're coming in. And so in tracking these buildings, this is not the regular nonprofit building set, the regular buildings that you see when you get a report that says that the average rent in New York City is $87 a foot. That's not true for nonprofits. The average rent for nonprofits is actually $54 a foot asking. There's a huge delta between what the general market does and what the nonprofit sector does. But within that, this is a handy chart say maybe you moved into a neighborhood that used to be affordable and it's become more expensive. You can stay in that neighborhood by moving to a more affordable Class B building, or you can move to another neighborhood and potentially upgrade to Class A and get the benefits of a cheaper neighborhood like what we're seeing right now in downtown Brooklyn. It's some of the lowest prices that we've seen in the past 15 years. You can do a Class A location in downtown Brooklyn for a taking rent in the mid to low 40s per square foot. And this is showing that delta, this $83.65 a foot versus $58 a foot for the nonprofit building. This is asking, not taking. Taking rents are generally about 10% lower than asking rents. We also track how much nonprofits spend as a percentage of their budget. So that's the annual expenses, and then how much occupancy expenses as a percentage of that budget. And you'll see that the human services organizations oftentimes spend a very large portion of their budget, while as the folks that are more office only, like international foreign affairs organizations or membership organizations, spend the smallest amount on their budget. Religion, so this data is actually all nonprofits that are larger than $100,000 a year in annual expense. And so for small religious organizations, they oftentimes spend a very large portion of their budget on real estate. But for very large organizations, that number is much smaller. And then we look at it based upon size. So people need to benchmark against their peers. So this is really important for talking to your board about how to look at what's appropriate amount to spend on your real estate. And so for organizations that are larger than $10 million a year, they spend on average 6.3% on their real estate. Medium-sized orgs spend closer to 12%, and then small orgs spend a disproportionate on their real estate. These are the orgs that actually have office space, so it's a bit skewed, because if you have office space and you're a small org, there's sort of a fixed minimum price, but it ends up being about 15 to 30% of their budget is allocated towards real estate. So if you walk away with nothing from this presentation, if you want to go ahead and embark on the market, and we want you to be smart. Whether or not you work with a broker, you should work with a broker, because they will save you money, especially if they're someone that specializes in nonprofit. But important to do is to not wait until the very end of your lease to start negotiating if you're planning on staying in your space. You need to get ahead of it. That's 18 months ahead. That makes the landlord know that you're engaging the marketplace and have a credible threat to leave. If you wait until the very end, they generally raise your rent by 10 to 20%. If you get ahead of it, there's potentially up to 2.5 years of rent that they can save by keeping you versus going out to the market. And that's having the downtime of 6 to 12 months, having to pay for an entirely new build, which is oftentimes 1 to 2 years of rent, and then having all the costs associated with fees for negotiating a new build. So that 2.5 years, you can capture the value of your renewal, and that can potentially lower your overall occupancy expense over a 10-year deal by 20 to 25%. Also understand the difference between effective rent versus face rent. So for the landlords that are private equity funds and investments that plan on 5-year cycles, they're looking in 5 years from now to redeploy their capital and want to exit from an investment. So what they care about is what the net operating income for that asset is in 5 years, not what it is day one. So that means that if it's that kind of landlord, you can get lots of free rent, you can get a big concession package that sometimes can include furniture, but they then want in year 5 for the face rent to be as high as possible. If it's the opposite, if it's a family-owned landlord, they're willing to do maybe the lowest possible rent, but they don't want to put out of pocket out. So know your landlord to be able to maximize your leverage. And then there's a lot more important things than one of the most important things that gets overlooked is flexibility. So most organizations in a 10-year lease don't live out the entire term or need more or less space than they did when they started. So having the ability to sublease, to license a portion of your space to partner nonprofits, to assign your lease, or to expand and contract are critically important. And if you include that in the beginning, you're going to be able to get some of those rights built into your lease. Make sure that it doesn't say that if you're a organization that serves formerly incarcerated youth, make sure it doesn't say that you're only allowed to sublease to someone that serves formerly incarcerated youth. It should be anyone that's able to reasonably afford to pay their rent and keep in accordance with the quality of the building. And this has happened a lot where organizations hamstring themselves into very restrictive uses. This happened to the Screen Actors Guild, and they were not allowed to lease to another union, for example. So big organizations make this mistake all the time. And finally, as I mentioned before, you want to structure the deal to minimize risk. So get a turnkey where the free rent clock doesn't start until you get a C of O or TCO to legally use your space. We can talk about this at a later point if anyone's interested, but this is how you can structure your deal to not pay real estate taxes. It's called a leasehold condominium, and it generally requires you to have a 30-year lease. And it simulates ownership. And there's some ways in which you can to structure your deal that if you don't want to do a leasehold condo, you can do something called an ICAP abatement, which freezes the taxes before you make a big investment, or lease in a tax-exempt building like the Interchurch Center, or move into a building or own your own building. So these are the ways in which you can save on the taxes. But if you can't do any of those three, a leasehold condominium can really be a large savings over a long-term lease. Handing it over to Yvonne.
Okay. So after Stephen has done all of his magic, usually he might give me a call and say that you would need a project manager or somebody to really walk you through and simplify the process of a capital project.
By the way, you want to call Yvonne not when you're ready to sign the lease. Yes. You want to call her when you're negotiating the term sheet.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So that's when Stephen also calls me. So, we've been really lucky that we service both for-profit and nonprofit clients. Our largest for-profit client is actually a Class A landlord called Beacon Capital. So in the pandemic, we started working for them on a building near Grand Central that was pretty much like 25% filled. So year after year, we've been building that building. It is now almost occupied fully. So we have a lot of data in terms of how landlords operate, how they charge for their turnkeys when they're valuing construction, what they think are change orders to a tenant, and sort of what information they need really to get from you in terms of managing construction costs. I think a lot of it starts off really in terms of understanding the stages. There's really in the first 2 to 3 months, this sort of due diligence period where Stephen and myself would be working together to really make sure that you have all of your lease terms in your favor, but also that you have what is called a work letter produced correctly. The work letter really defines what you can get from the landlord in terms of their build out. And that's really something that takes a lot of time to develop, a lot of needs assessments to look into. And you actually have to put in a lot of thought, whether you're upsizing or downsizing, there's still that same thought process to kind of minimize the cost risk that you have. Moving into that, it's typically like a design phase for them. When it's a turnkey project, typically the landlord is going to give you like a base package of things that they're designing to. They're going to show you sample floor plates. So it's a little bit less time intensive in terms of your time commitment, although we try to weigh in early on as to what your needs are in terms of an aesthetic finish. They go out for bid, they do all this like pricing for you, but they'll come back with what they think are above standard ask, which are actually paid for by your budget. Construction typically takes about 5 to 6 months. That's really typical for anything. I would say from 5,000 rentable square feet up to 30,000 rentable square feet. It's about the same. They'll just put more people on it if it's like multiple floors. So 6 months is really the standard in terms of like the outside date where the landlord is holding to deliver your space. And then you have a month of closeout, which is to make sure that your operations are there, that the move-in is complete, and that your systems are there. And there's a punch list process to make sure the landlord gives you exactly what you asked for, and there's no like minor changes or revisions that need to be done. So this is actually expanding on that. It really, on the lower level, shows the amount of commitment that is still required on your end. A lot of our clients come in and they say, oh, well, the landlord's doing the turnkey, so we're done, right? And that's really where the fact that you're done, or you think that you're done before doing all of this work, that's really where a lot of these change orders happen in construction. Right, there could be upticks to this. So in the very beginning, during the due diligence and lease portions, you have all of these things that I've described down below, which are of importance. Some may be more important than others, but in theory, what we typically do is we go through every single one and we try to get as much as possible into the work letter. Whether it's given to you as part of the, build out and they're giving it to you for free, right? That they're carrying the cost, or whether they say, no, you know what? I think this is additive. You're going to get charged for it. The sooner that we can get it in before it becoming a change order, the best timing is really at that work letter stage, because you can actually guarantee that at the time of bid, that you're given some sort of itemized cost checklist that you can say, you know what, yes, I want to do this, or I don't. It's not usually something unknown in terms of like a potential tenant delay. If they think it's going to be a tenant delay, they're going to say, you know what, this will be a tenant delay and it will be X amount more to your schedule. Are you willing to accept that or not? So it's always good to go through all of these things upfront early. We put in other things that we've had some of our larger clients do. Branding and graphics is something where a lot of the larger nonprofits that we serve, because a turnkey is really standardized to what a landlord will provide you, and it kind of looks like every other floor that they've built, branding and graphics is really something where it's a low cost, high value output where you can really customize to your space. Right? You bring in some of your identity, people use it for fundraising or they use it for like their social media. It's something that we try to handle, but the landlord will not be doing that for you. So that's something that we handle in-house with an actual consultant to do that. In construction, although the landlord is building your space, there's all these other things that basically we need to actually contract and do for you. Furniture, movers, fine cleaning, liquidation at your old site, data cabling, anything IT related, anything audiovisual related, anything security related. The landlord does not usually handle that, or anything to do with like appliances in terms of other than the standard fridge, microwave, things that they would give as part of that turnkey. This is actually, we're like taking deeper dives into the process, right? So in terms of due diligence and programming, you do need a core team. Typically, it is your broker, your PM, an architect, and an engineer. It could be that the landlord gives you that architect and engineer. That typically, we try to structure that it's free as part of the process, that they have some time to spend with you. And really, what you're looking at is terms of programming is like, a lot of times when you're upsizing, downsizing, you're changing the way you sit together, the way you work together, right? Anything that you want to enhance or improve or that you didn't like, this is the time to do it. This gets you to the right size that you need. And it informs us is what all of your other needs are for infrastructure. So it's really important to do that. Due diligence is important if you're going into a space that may or may not have the infrastructure that you require. So that's something that we look at in totality. We can build an initial capital budget. I will tell you that for our smallest or more cost-sensitive nonprofits, you're still looking to spend, I would say the lowest budget that we spent on a turnkey is about $250,000. Some clients spend, a lot more. In this image, you see Planned Parenthood. They spent a lot more on their turnkey. They had 3 floors. They did major graphics, as you can see, and added in a lot of aesthetic elements, such as like these floating wood ceilings. So that's something that we can set very early on if we go through this process with you.
What you should never do is have a landlord build to a very small cap. They'll oftentimes try to tell you, oh, it's only going to cost $60 a foot to build your space, and it in general it costs, Yvonne, correct me if I'm wrong, between like $120 and $150 a foot to build the space.
Correct. I will tell you offhand that when we work with a landlord, they may be able to squeeze that, but that's really for their benefit, right? So it's sort of like, well, how much dollars can I work on as a landlord? Typically, what they pass on to the tenants is usually more around the range that Stephen is quoting.
Yeah. So just in general, don't agree to a cap if you can avoid it. Try to get anything you can into the scope of work, like she mentioned, and then only pay for upgrades on things like environmental graphics or specialty features.
This is really a continuation on the needs assessment, but this is actually, I think, something that a lot of our clients are not always as prepared for, because this is really where it may drive changes in your construction costs. This is where you're open for change orders. And that is also why sometimes people see elevated numbers of construction. So in terms of the core team here, you're expanding your team, right? You have the core team initially, but you also have a furniture dealer, you have movers, signage, IT and network, audio visual, which is a huge portion usually of a budget, and security vendors. We go through all of this again pretty early on. As much as we can get into the needs assessment and the work letter, we do it up front so that if there's any electrical coordination, a landlord-owned electrical, if we can get things included in turnkey for free, it's something you don't have to pay for. I will make a note on security systems. Recently, is probably in the last 2 years or so, we've seen an uptick in terms of enhanced security requirements. That is typically something that the tenant will have to pay for, on top of just general security, like access card readers and intercom systems. We're seeing a request for man traps, bullet resistant glazing. That's something that we haven't seen pretty regularly for the last 5 years, but in the last 1.5 to 2 years, it's become something popular.
But there's more affordable ways to do it. So, there's a very expensive version of it, and then there's a practical version where you reinforce a supply closet as opposed to, making it a bomb shelter.
Yeah. Just if you could go back one. So actually, just in terms of the images that you see, this is the Mist Foundation. It's a shared project between myself and Stephen. They spent a lot on graphics and branding. So if you can see, if in your mind, if you were to imagine that they didn't have all of this imagery of their mission actually on the glass, they would have been delivered with a space with the gray carpet and just really just glass fronts that would look very typical to a generic office. But
this, by the way, is one of those buildings that in downtown Brooklyn, pre-pandemic, they were looking for over $100 a foot, and we got an effective rent in the low 50s for Ms. Foundation. And because it has 14-foot ceilings, it's new construction, and it's column-free 50-foot spans, with amenities, shared terraces, bike storage rooms, showers, all of the bells and whistles that's never was supposed to be available at those rents.
Design and construction. So this is something that actually varies amongst the clients that we have. Some tenants really want to be involved in design, and some landlords will tell you, I'm delivering a turnkey. That means that, our objective here is to build as quickly as possible and get you in so that you can start your free rent period, and then we can start collecting rent. It's not really engineered for people to customize it every day as it's like a custom design project. However, if we know about things up front and we are able to do that in the needs assessment, we are able to even put some of these asks were reasonable into the work letter and into the lease to say, hey, I need my team really needs to be able to see, a ceiling plan. It's important to us. I really need to be able to see my power plan. I need to see my layout before it's done. And where reasonable requests are in, landlords usually say, okay, we'll do a page turn, we'll go through it with you. We understand that's important. It's a lot better to have that upfront as an ask versus like asking for it like midway through the design process and you're like, no, we're in production mode already. We're not gonna entertain this. It's just you're delaying the job. So in this particular case, it's really that the core team expands a little bit more. You're bringing in all of your team members here. Design is really iterative in a sense where we're still bringing our vendors in, our IT, security, signage, furniture. All of these vendors still need to be able to have time to do a page turn of the set to make sure that they're coordinated so that you're not in construction getting these like, construction change orders. For example, most of the change orders that have the largest value of impact where it's like, wow, I didn't know I had to pay for this, is usually something that's repetitive, that's small. We had a project where we need more power in an office, right? And they wanted to add something in, but it was a standard ask that was typical. We didn't put it in early on. They wanted to make a change in construction. You have one office, it's like, a couple $100. You have like 10 of them, it becomes, multiplied by 10. So it's actually really important to try to plan early on for this phase.
Yeah, and what Yvonne was saying, like at a minimum, you want to have a basic schematic drawing with a narrative about any kind of specialty things that should be included in the building standard. as part of the lease, so that you're not bringing those issues up later on. And ideally, you include it in the term sheet negotiation while you still have the most leverage.
Closeout and occupancy, really important, not always well managed. This is again something that should happen in terms of the term sheet and the lease, that you are allowed to have an actual walkthrough. Some leases that I've seen, they're like, okay, you know what? We just hand over the space. We're like substantially complete. We're good to go. The reality is we're seeing a lot of issues where people just move in and they don't have that chance to really calibrate on things that they really should be doing in closeout. For example, you may have faulty electrical that needs to be tested. One very important thing is actually comfort balancing. We're seeing a high uptick right now of I don't even know what to call them. We call them partial turnkeys, because I think there's been a lot of unused or untouched spaces in the pandemic. Some of these landlords, which it's completely fine, right? They're like, "Hey, I have this great space. It's been barely used, and you need to move around. Let's just modify that space, but we'll keep half of it as is." And you net some savings, I would assume, in terms of like transactional costs, because it's we're only doing like a smaller capital project. But it's really important to test the system that's running your HVAC, because if you don't get a chance to test it now and sign it off for the landlord, you're never going to get a chance to test it. And because it hasn't been run for, as efficiently as it should, it's really something that we call for in every work letter now, to say, hey, when you turn this over, I need you to give me a balancing report. Other things here, really just punch lists is something that you should all be familiar with. It is at a point of move-in, you get a series of days. Usually it's anywhere 5 to 10 days or so that you have to deliver a list of items to the landlord to say, hey, I noticed that this paint patch needs to be done. This carpet tile is lifting up. All of these things are supposedly minor and don't really affect your business use or occupancy of the space. It's not like, hey, my door handles are missing. That's something that actually affects your business occupancy. It's not a turnover, an official turnover of the space. So punch list is something that just needs to be put some thought into it. The landlord will typically be working up to 30 days in the space, fixing it after you move in. Here we talk a lot about just sort of the planning. I think I put the slide together in terms of just the extra care is really needed, because a lot of our nonprofit clients, especially on commercial interiors, they go, I'm ready to start. We just hand everything to the landlord and then we're good, right? And that's not true, right? There's a lot that needs to be thought about. You got to test your limits, define your limits. You may have to get board approval depending on how big the move is and what you're trying to do. Especially, we have clients that are downsizing. They're potentially had a thought about downsizing because of the cost savings, but I don't feel like they were actually ready to do it. Like, we've had clients come, look at this space. Do you think we'll fit? Visually, we can't tell you if you'll fit without having done a needs assessment and to look at really what you're giving up and what you may be able to do better with in terms of your adjacencies and your sizing. So this I'm not going to talk too much about the slide, but really, if you read through what I've noted as extra care, those are really good lists to think about how you build the budget and how you build the strategy for how you really manage that capital project, so you're not left hanging over schedule and over budget.
All right, so that was a lot. Hopefully, you guys were able to absorb. And if anyone wants additional information from us afterwards, please feel free to reach out. We're here to be a resource to you, hence the name Nonprofit Resource Hub. Yvonne is top notch and is really expert at making complicated projects simple and taking that burden off of the organization. So oftentimes you don't have someone on your team who's expert at design and construction. That's why you need to have someone like Yvonne who can build that capacity for the time period that you need it, and then you don't have to always have them on board. That's how you should really think about your team, is that you're staffing up to be able to handle something that's outside of the range of your expertise. And it's an important use of funds, because a little bit of money spent on that can save you a lot of money in the overall project.
Thank you both so much. I have some questions, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay, thank you. So this was really eye-opening for me, and I know what you both do, but to kind of hear how you have created this team of your own is amazing, and how you are also really helping your clients make sure you're covering all bases. So let's say we have an organization that's just starting the process. What would you say are kind of the top three first steps that they should be considering?
So when you talk about just starting the process,
They haven't even found a spot yet.
yeah. So the very beginning of this process should generally be as part of your strategic plan, or that you have an upcoming lease expiration. But you should have the conversations. Hey, is the space that we're in supporting our use, our needs? And do I even need space at all? Right. You should start from that assumption, because you don't want to say, well, just because we've always had it, then we should definitely need something like this moving forward. Take the opportunity, if you have enough time, to start from what is the purpose of my space, and is our space serving those needs? So that's one question. And then two, do I have the right team in place? So internally, you have to allocate some real time into this. And oftentimes at nonprofits and at every other type of organization, people are a little bit over capacity, especially at the senior level. So if there's someone on the executive team who you can appoint to be the lead, who's excited about doing this or has some experience doing it, you should try to figure out who's the champion for this. It might be the CEO, it might be the CFO, it might be someone who happens to just have this expertise that you can wrap into it. But you need to have a advocate on your team, and you need to figure out who on your board is going to also be on that team. So is there one person who's going to be the lead? Is there a small subcommittee? And those three things combined, like, why do I need space? What is my plan? And then who is our internal team, are the first three things, so that you can then start having those conversations. And then once you're really ready to sort of have had those internal conversations, is when you want to bring in external partners like real estate consultants like me, or project managers and architects.
So I'm really glad that you said that. So, and I'm taking notes as you're speaking, just because we'll send a follow up to everybody. Um, Prior to anybody even calling either of you, there should be their own internal team, which would be, let's just say, the executive director or president, along with the subcommittee, to decide exactly what it is that what their needs are. If their needs are, you know what, let's just repurpose the space that we're in right now, they would call Yvonne. Am I correct about this?
I
If
mean, I
they're
think it's a combination. It's kind of it's organic in a way, right? I sometimes we get, if you follow the steps which are outlined, you always tend to get a good result. However, sometimes people call me, old clients call me, and they'll say, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think?" Right? Because sometimes when you're trying to get to that board level, um, being able to call somebody, and we don't charge for that. It's just a conversation, and being able to say, "Hey, well, if you're looking to downsize because of cost, are you going to downsize so much that you don't have future growth later on, right? Like how many years are we talking about, right? And to even think about, like, what's my capital budget looking like for this? What am I talking about? Like, is it millions? Is it hundreds of thousands? We can't give you an exact answer, but we can at least give you some data that would make it more useful to say, hey, you know what? I can now take this to frame my conversation a little bit. Because knowledge is, I think, it's always free, right?
Yeah, and I
And
would,
yeah.
just like Yvonne was saying, you don't have the internal resources probably to do a full needs assessment. So the question is really a simple gating issue, is like, do I need to make a change in my real estate? Is it working or is it not? And do we need to run, a real process? And you probably then need to engage a professional to be able to then test your assumptions and to understand your range of options. You wouldn't, very unusual to have been able to internally do the entire needs assessment process.
Mhm. So with that said, let's say they get to a point, let's say an organization gets to a point where they've done the assessment, they have their internal team, they have the vision, they know the budget. What I love about how the two of you work together, and this has not been something that I've had to do in my career, but I love that you already have kind of your own team set in place. What do you think is most efficient in terms of, if somebody calls Stephen, will say, and they say, hey, I have a team, we have a vision, we've done our assessment, we have our budget, we're going to look for a new space. who else do you recommend being on that team? Because I know you said earlier Yvonne should come in earlier, sooner rather than later. Who else should be part of your team with that internal team to help them make this as seamless as possible and helps them save money in the end, really? Time is money, right?
So Yvonne and I both will help with the team assembly process. It's, you don't want to spend too much money too early, but it's helpful to spend money when appropriate at the right time. Otherwise, you spend more overall. And
Mhm.
so one of the earliest people you bring on is an owner's rep like Yvonne and a broker like myself. And then you're going to want to, early on also, if you're looking at buying something, you need to bring in a, um, a financial consultant that specializes in nonprofit finance, because then you can test the assumptions of your borrowing capacity and your ability to do a purchase project.
Mhm.
But it really evolves over time. So there's going to be, real estate lawyers. If you take one piece of advice, if you can avoid it, like please do not have your board member be your real estate lawyer. It can be someone else at their firm who specializes in commercial real estate, but it should not be your board member because you can't push them in the same way you can push someone you're paying for. And if you're getting pro bono, it should be someone that is going to put real adequate time into it. Having a pro bono that um, is going to sort of back burner this is going to end up costing you, time, which will end up costing you money. And it's generally worth it. If you can spend a little bit on legal, that's money that's very well spent. Yvonne, anything to add to that?
Um, I think the reality is that sometimes clients who are looking to maintain a certain level of aesthetics, they sometimes do bring their own architect. If you choose to bring your own architect or interior designer, the two are different. An architect, and you're really saying, I need to customize my space. It's useful to bring them on early so that we know that we have to structure them in as part of like the work letter. Maybe they transition into the landlord team. There's a project that we've been doing with Stephen, such as that, right? And it's very important. Then certainly bring them early, not after like the lease is signed and you're like, I want to use my architect. Interior designers are a little bit different. We typically ask that they also come forward. If you don't like structure the contract yet, we would help you do that. But if there's like, this person did my last space, I need them on board to look at this. They're going to look at everything for me. Bring them also before the work letter gets signed in case they have any comments that we have to put in.
Thank you. I think that's incredibly helpful, especially if we have nonprofits here that are in that beginning stage to really envision what the team should be like in those earlier stages. And even to mention that, bring those people in so it's not a surprise later on down the road. What about in terms of, I'm just looking at the questions that were sent to me, um, potential roadblocks that they should be, sorry, I'm just trying to read this here. Potential roadblocks that they should be aware of in the beginning stages? Anything that would kind of raises a red flag?
So one thing that, I'm in the middle of a process right now with, and it's important to know how long things take. So Yvonne showed you the schedule, but being realistic about your lease negotiation process. Unfortunately, the fastest lease I've ever done is a 6 week lease, and that's extremely fast. It generally takes 3 to 4 months and can take up to 6 months. I'm working on a deal now that it's in month 14 of lease negotiation. It's a large deal, but don't underestimate that amount of time because it takes longer than it should. And then
And
time.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, did you lose leverage as you lose time? Because then you're at a point where you start to have to give in on things that you otherwise would.
Is there just an average, Stephen, is there an average length of time that most nonprofits go for a lease, or does it really vary?
It varies based upon their funding drivers. Oftentimes, if you have a government funding, you can get a termination due to loss of funding. So that allows you to have a long term lease with the ability to terminate if you lose a contract. But generally speaking, if you want the landlord to customize the space at all, you need a minimum of 5 years. 7 years is preferred, and then 10 to 15 years is what larger organizations do that have a little bit more stability.
Thank you.
I would add that
Yvonne?
budget is super important to think about, right? A lot of people, there's no zero cost whenever you're moving. That's for sure. And you have to be prepared to spend some capital. If you're looking, we have a lot of clients nowadays who are actually even in a landlord turnkey. They're looking for significant like grants to fund security, to fund, furniture, AV purchases, itemized lists that we need. We typically try to look at that early on, just to give an assessment of like, hey, you know what kind of data do you need ahead of time, right? So that we can kind of align it with the periods that you're trying to move in, and then we can back it out and tell you, okay, you need to start like this. This makes sense. We can do this. We can get that in. You could probably get that grant activated to pay for this. So we do help in cash flow forecasting as well for the project.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So the last question I have here is if the board decides that they're not in a position or do not want to move their space, is there an opportunity to work with, I guess this would be for you more, Yvonne, for reimagining the space?
Yes. So we are helping right now a foundation. I'm not sure if I can name them, but
What does it
they
rhyme with? No, I'm kidding.
it's like three letters, three words, but they were on a floor of a building and they acquired the floor below them. And they said, it's in such great condition because there was a financial company that the financial company probably spent like, I think there's like a $2 million AV package in there for some town hall space that they did, right? And they said, you know what? It'd be such a waste to change this out, right? We're taking it as is. Now the colors are very, very different. They have a very muted classic, sort of like Mies van der Rohe kind of things upstairs. And then downstairs, the firm decided to do each section, I would say, in the seasons. So there's like blue, green, and there's like red. It just doesn't work. But what we can do then is really look at finishes. We can change out furniture. We've had substantial success also with our smaller clients who come in and they're like, we worked with Chancellors for Children. They came to us, actually, I think it's one of Stephen's clients, and they were like, look, we need to make this space work. It's an early childhood therapy center, and it was a turnkey. We need to make it look something different. And how do we do it without spending any money? I think we achieved everything for below 200K. And that was really utilizing some furniture donations, some secondhand product. We are now adept at actually procuring furniture such as that, and we have those relationships where we can still get a warranty on these things as well based on our relationships with vendors. So there's a lot you can do with just cheaper, cost-effective solutions that don't really, it doesn't show in terms of the finished product.
One thing that you should know is just because you want to stay in the space doesn't mean you can't create the credible threat that you are considering leaving, and that the landlord's going to have to do something to make it worth your while to stay. So I'm working with an organization right now that's in a building that is known to have a very beneficent landlord. The landlord will oftentimes join many boards of the nonprofits in the building, and then he will try to, it's not because he's being, a vulture. It's just the nature of being a landlord. He oftentimes says to them, you should just renew and try to make it as low cost as possible, and don't do any work, and we can give you a good deal, and don't bring in a broker or anything because that'll just cost you more money. And so I'm working with it on this project, and we looked at all alternatives, and when we told the landlord that we were actually considering leaving, his offer went down by 20%, and he was happy to pay the landlord the broker's fee as well. And he got the money to do renovation work, to do a full renovation. So I just, make sure you understand your leverage, especially if you're in the garment district, you have a ton of leverage. You want to engage a broker, whether or not you want to, even if you're planning on staying, so that you can create a situation where the landlord will pay for any renovation you have and reduce your rent.
Thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I don't think that would be somebody's natural thought process to call a broker if they're thinking about staying. So that's great to know that that's something that you do. We should probably do a blog post about that. Stephen, I have one last question for you. Somebody said if they only need temporary space while they're doing construction in their permanent space, do you offer the opportunity to take advantage of short-term leases?
Yeah, so we do this, as part of our services, and you need to There's a different strategy for short-term leases, but it's very difficult to do without a broker. And so, yes, we do, and we look at this as part of a long-term relationship. Even if we end up not getting paid much as part of the process, we're happy to help on those situations.
Terrific. Okay, I think that's all the questions that came into me. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add?
Oh, I would add just in terms of those short-term leases, typically when we move, we just did local projects. They stayed at 123 Williams, they moved out, the landlord did some work in there. Most of them stay within the building if they can. And I think they were able to negotiate it as part of the work letter, like you give a space to, exit out and you could get, I guess, favorable terms, right? Negotiating that way if they have space. We did Brennan Center, which was, they also took temporary space in the building and came back into their home.
Yeah, one of the deals I'm doing now, the landlord is paying for their swing space as part of the deal to keep them. So don't assume you have to pay for your short-term space during construction.
Okay, thank you. So I've been taking copious notes here and I will be following up with everybody. With these notes, I would like to thank both of you very much. If you want to put I don't know if you had your contact on your last slide with your photos, but you may just want to share that for those that are here with us. If you would like to connect directly with Yvonne or Stephen, uh, their contacts are in the chat. You are always welcome to reach out to us. We'll be happy to connect you with them. I'm going to be following up with both of you because you really gave me some important information that I think that the sector needs to know in terms of what you're doing, and maybe we can get some blog posts from you if you don't mind. Um, Again, I want to thank you both so much. That was a lot of info in a short period of time, but so important and really informative. So thank you.
Thank
And
you,
thank all of
Yeah,
you
thank you.
for joining us. So
everyone.
again, if you are not a nonprofit partner with the Nonprofit Resource Hub, please go ahead and join. It's free to join, and you'll have access to really great resources and webinars like this, and access to our associate members that you are certainly welcome to reach out to and work with. Stephen and Yvonne, now that I know that you should be kind of like the team from the beginning, this is good. We can certainly recommend that. And if you have any other webinar ideas, for those of you that are joining us for the first time today, please, reach out and ask us. We usually know somebody that can present and help you out. So thank you both. I hope everybody has a great day, and we will be sending a recording of this out to everybody by the beginning of next week. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take
Bye.
Bye.
care, everybody.